Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining this public forum that's hosted jointly by the Petoskey District Library and the League of Women Voters, Northern Lower Michigan. I'm Robin Jordan, president of the League of Women Voters, Northern Lower Michigan, and I want to say a few reminders as we start. Please be sure to remain on mute during the presentation. And like I just mentioned, it's best to click on speaker view instead of gallery view, so your visual focus is on each panelist as they present their topic. And as usual, this presentation is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel with the link available on our webpage. Part of tonight's presentation includes a Q&A, and we're asking that you use the chat function to ask your question, and a moderator will read the question. You can write a question anytime you want during the presentation, and they will be read after all the panelists have spoken. For those of you unfamiliar with the League of Women Voters, we are a nonpartisan political organization, and we encourage informed participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and we aim to influence public policy through education and advocacy. We do not support any political candidate or any political party. We do have positions on public policy which inform our advocacy work, and we have positions on safeguarding the environment. Tonight's informational presentation on septic system issues obviously relates to the quality of our waters and to public health. And we're very pleased to have a local panel of field experts to share their expertise and knowledge with us. A big thank you to the wonderful Petoskey District Library for co-sponsoring this forum and for providing our technical support tonight. I also want to thank our Healthcare Committee and our Environment and Natural Resources Committees for organizing this public forum. I'm now going to turn the program over to Ann Scott, who is a co-chair of our Environment and Natural Resources Committee. She will moderate tonight's forum. Ann?
Thank you. And thank you all for coming. Hope you have a good evening. And thank you all those people on Zoom. We have a great response. I think there were about 60 people that registered for the Zoom presentation. I think they're slowly coming in still. I'm going to first introduce Anna McGlashan. Both of our speakers tonight are experts in their field, and they are local, which is very nice for us to have local experts that can speak to us. So Anna is our first speaker, and she returned to the tip of the Met watershed as a local policy manager after working as a policy and advocacy intern at the Watershed Council in the summer of 22. In her current position, she is focused on issues that potentially impact water quality within a 4-county area. She previously worked for New York State's Department of Environmental Conservation, the University of Michigan School of Environment and Sustainability. She graduated from the U of M with degrees in environmental science and environmental policy. We're very pleased to welcome Anna to speak on this important topic.
Hello, I'm the local policy manager, and I'm going to be talking about this from a watershed perspective and from what our organization has been doing. And then Dan is going to come up and give you a little bit more of the health department perspective. And so some of the information is going to double count, but it's okay. It's all important. I work for the Watershed Council, which is an environmental nonprofit that works out of Northern Michigan and works to protect water quality. So first thing is, we all live in a watershed, and I'm going to first define what that is. So a watershed is the geographic area where the precipitation that falls onto that area is going to end up in a particular place. And so you can usually think about that as the mouth of a river or a lake. It's the area that drains to that body of water. And the reason why this is important is because the precipitation that falls onto the land is going to either run over the land or through the land and pick up the characteristics of that soil, right? And so if you have the Maumee River that's running through a densely agricultural area, it's picking up the fertilizers and the pesticides that are applied to that land, and then it ends up in Lake Erie. So one of the things that the Watershed Council has to do as we're looking at water quality is look at not just point sources of pollution, a factory that might be having a discharge out of a pipe, and you can point to it and say, this is where that's coming from. But we also have to look at the land use. How are people actually using the land and what are they putting onto it? Because that's going to impact the water quality that we care about, both from a cultural perspective and a sort of human perspective, but also from that recreation and economic perspective. And one of the important things to think about here also is that the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, EGLE, and the Watershed Council have all identified non-point source pollution as the greatest threat to water quality. So when you're thinking about this, in the 1970s, there was a big movement to have regulations that were looking at those point sources of pollution. In northern Michigan today, the biggest threat is actually non-point source pollution. And when you're thinking about that, you need to be thinking about septic systems, but also shoreline development, increases in percentage impervious surface coverage, things that are the way that we're interacting with the land, not just with direct discharges into the water. So brief, what is a septic system? So there's two major components. The water from your house is going to go into your septic tank, where it's going to separate into three general layers. The scum layer, which is your oils and greases floating at the top, the sludge, which is the heavier materials that drop down to the bottom, and the effluent, which is that water, which is what should be the only thing that's passing through out into your drain field. So the two major components, tank and the drain field. Of the tank, hopefully only the effluent is outflowing into the drain field. And you want to make sure that your drain field is sufficiently separated from groundwater and from surface water, because what's happening if you have a septic system that is properly designed, sited, installed, and functioning, it is not a threat to water quality. And that should be said on slide 2, right? If you have a septic system that's working well, that is okay, you're good. What we're concerned about is if you have a septic tank that's undersized for your home, or your drain field is improperly isolated from surface or groundwater, or maybe your septic system is failing, so it's not properly processing the nutrients and the pathogens that are being put into that system. So it's not that we're looking at this and saying all septic systems are bad, it's that we're saying septic systems that are failing or have something wrong with the way they were designed, sited, installed, that's where the big problem is. So what is the output and why does that matter? So the three basic things that we're looking at in terms of the effluent are going to be nutrients, pathogens, and pharmaceuticals or other chemicals. So when we're talking about nutrients, plants are typically limited in their growth by nutrients. And up here, it's usually phosphorus. So if you're adding more nutrients, you're allowing more plant growth. Why does that matter? Nutrient loading can lead to algal blooms. And an algal bloom in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing, except for it may impact tourism or your ability and enjoyment to go to a beach. The problem is when you have a severe harmful algal bloom, and then that can be toxic and that can start having public health outcomes, and that can start having serious impacts on economy and recreation. The next thing is this pathogen question, and we're frequently talking about E. coli here. If your septic system is not properly processing that bacteria and it's being dumped into surface water or groundwater in a way that it's going to interact with humans, that's going to be another potential issue that is a public health concern associated with the failure of a septic system. And then this last one, pharmaceuticals and other chemicals. Just as a general statement, if you're dumping household chemicals down your sink, it is probably a bad idea. You're going to want to be careful about what you're putting down your system, because your system may not be designed to adequately process that before it ends up in surface or groundwater. So in the back, and in theory, in the chat, there's some publications, and I'm going to quickly reference this one, Proper Septic System Maintenance, because it's going to have a lot more information than what I'm going over here. So septic systems require regular maintenance, which is frequently pumping of the septic tank. A septic system is going to require you to protect your drain field. So you shouldn't be compacting that soil. You shouldn't be planting large, deep-rooted trees over your drain field. And you need to be doing that vegetation management to make sure that you're not somehow impacting that drain field. And then again, with that question of what are you putting into that system, make sure that you're not using too much water at one time or putting down products that that system isn't designed to handle. And then I apologize for those of you that are in person, that's a little bit covering it up, but
Trying to get a copy of what we're working on.
it's all right. But then, so we've talked about, okay, how does a septic system impact watersheds? And we've talked about, well, what is a septic system? Next question, which is probably why you're here, is septic system regulation. So it's important to note that while there is no uniform statewide code, there are existing systems for the oversight of septic systems. There is a framework for the oversight of septic systems. So the local health department regulates the siting, design, and installation of residential septic systems based on site characteristics and the district sanitary code. And generally, commercial septic systems are regulated by the state, residential regulated by the local health department. And there's this matrix or constellation of organizations and policies that are going to be the existing system of oversight. So one is this education and outreach component. By coming here today or by reading educational materials, you are learning more about how to properly maintain your system and identify failures. And that is going to change behavior in a way that is in and of itself a shift in policy. The district sanitary code is again looking at how these systems are designed, sited, and installed. Local ordinances, because there are some local ordinances, are also a component of this that overlay on top of the district sanitary code. Statewide legislation is being debated. I'm going to say that that is still under debate and has not yet been introduced to committee. And so I can't come to you and say this is exactly what is being proposed and discussed. That's still under discussion at this time. And then Eagle also has oversight responsibilities. So part of this is saying that while we're pushing for a uniform statewide code or unified statewide oversight, that is in addition to these other pieces that already do exist that do provide some oversight in this process. The important thing to note here, though, is that the district sanitary code is looking at that front end. And if you have a system that is already in the ground, the health department doesn't get pulled in until it does not usually get pulled in until there's a visible failure. There's the option to apply to have the health department come and check your septic system. You can just fill out a form and a sanitarian will come do an inspection of your septic tank. And that's pretty much what's happening under these ordinances at the local level. But many homeowners aren't using that option. And so there's many systems that are never seen again once they go into the ground until they fail. And that's where this gap is existing. Maybe. All right. Or not. Would you mind trying to click with the mouse? All right, that works. Okay, so
It's a touch screen too, so you can go across.
perfect. All right, so
That's why I was trying not to touch the mouse during it.
another publication plug here, a summary of the septic question. It's in the back, it's in the reference library if you're looking at the chat. This is going to go into a little bit more detail than what I'm going to go over in this presentation, but the 4 basic options are going to be a mandatory pumping ordinance, a mandatory inspection ordinance, a time of transfer or sale ordinance, or putting regulations into short-term rental ordinances. And this is options for local units of government, not state. Okay, it works. So with a mandatory pumping ordinance, this is coming in at that maintenance question. It's trying to prevent or delay the failure of existing septic systems. And the ordinance may require inspection in addition, or it may not. It's going to depend on how the local unit of government sets up that ordinance. Thank you. And I know I had more I wanted to say. So to date, these ordinances only require failures to have required act. So required actions are only associated with the failure. If you have system where it might be undersized for the home, or there might be another issue that is not leading to an imminent failure, the health department might provide recommended actions, but they're probably not going to require that action to happen. We're switching. And then the next step is or the next option I'm going to discuss is a periodic inspection. And so this is where at a time interval decided by the government organization, you are going to require either by the health department or by a certified third party that there's an inspection of the septic tank or of the septic system. This is going to happen periodically and therefore is more protective than a time of sale or transfer ordinance that I'm going to talk about next. And I'm just throwing that out there so that I can say this again on the next slide. And remedial actions may be required. And I will say that health departments and local units of government typically do not choose periodic inspection ordinances because they're administratively burdensome to enforce and to implement. So I'm going to set up this structure because this is a conversation that's happening at the state level as well, where if you have a periodic inspection, it is more protective, but it is also more burdensome. So then a time of sale or transfer, and people have started calling this a toast ordinance. So just throwing that out there as an acronym coming your way. So this is as you're selling or transferring the property, that particular transaction is what triggers the need to perform this septic inspection. And I will say that home buyers are very much in favor of these ordinances because then they know what they're getting into. One of the considerations with this, though, is that homeowners and realtors become concerned about this delaying the sale of a home, but that is found to be very much not the case. I think that was it Milton that it was 8 days was the average delay? So it is not substantially delaying the sale or transfer of a home, and home buyers do approve of this. And for an administration perspective, the administration of a time of sale or transfer ordinance is significantly easier than a periodic inspection because there's a triggering action and everyone is incentivized to get this over with as quickly and as painlessly as possible, as opposed to every 5 years, the health department comes after you and says, hey, by the way, this is a thing you have to do now. So the problem becomes, though, if you have a homeowner that's in that house for 30 years, they never sell it, that's 30 years where no one is taking a look at that system. No one is making sure that it isn't failing or impacting public health or water quality. Then there's short-term rentals. And this may seem a little bit out of left field, but bear with me here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So short-term rental properties are a strategic choice to identify properties that are likely to be overused for their designed septic system and are more likely to be sited close to bodies of surface water. So for both those reasons, they are higher risk. And so it is a valid target to try to do an intervention in a targeted way. So one thing that you might do is if you are a local unit of government, you might say, we are going to start requiring a permit for all of the Airbnbs in our jurisdiction. And to get this permit, you have to have a septic inspection on file every 7 years. Or before you get this permit, you have to get a septic inspection and they're going to tell you the maximum number of residents in this Airbnb before you put it up and list it on the internet. And this is going to prevent people from stuffing 7 people into a cabin that was designed to host 2, right? So it's this idea of selectively choosing properties that are more likely to be high risk and imposing additional restrictions in a targeted way. And this is going to leave out a large number of properties. And so it is not a very tightly woven safety net, but this is a way that you can get an immediate intervention on those higher risk parcels. So what are we currently doing in northern Michigan? So all of the ordinances passed at the local level in northern Michigan right now are time of sale or transfer. And this is an incomplete list. I will note that. What we are currently recommending is what we're calling the Torch Lake Township model, where Torch Lake Township recently passed a time of sale or transfer ordinance, but as part of that requirement, they also included a requirement for baseline inspections or one-time inspections of high-risk properties. These high-risk properties were properties that were within 500 feet of a body of water and properties that didn't have a permit on file. So the district sanitary code was created back in the 60s. If you don't have a permit on file, you probably have a pretty old septic system. And so this was a deliberate choice to try to find older systems that are more likely to fail and systems that are closer to surface water that are at higher risk due to that proximity. And then here is my last piece, which is to say that the Watershed Council believes that there is a need for a statewide floor, a uniform system so that we are sure that septic systems are not impacting water quality. That said, we are still in the process of working out exactly how to make that happen with all of the stakeholders that are involved. So there is a need to fill this gap, to address this problem. And one way that we can make that happen is by making progress at the local level. There's been effort to make a statewide regulation for more than 20 years, possibly-ish 30 years. And even if a statewide bill passed tomorrow, there would still be years before it was implemented because they would need to pass regulations at the state level for the implementation of that legislation. So we are actively working at the local level to get movement on this issue, not as a forget what's happening at the state level, but working on both at the same time, because even if, so current language at the state level would preempt local ordinances. And so there is a lot of hesitancy at the local level to take decisive action on this when they believe that a state bill would immediately roll back their efforts. And I would make the case that even if it is preempted by statewide legislation, there is still value in making those steps at the local level at this time, because we do need to move on this now. And that is it for me. And I'll leave you with my takeaways, which are that keep an eye on what's happening at the state level. It's important, and I think it's really interesting. 2, if you have the capacity and the interest, advocate at the local level to get something done. And then 3, if you have a septic system, make sure that you know what failure looks like and what you need to do to maintain that system. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Maya. That was very informative. And we're holding questions until both speakers have had the opportunity to speak. Our next speaker is Dan Thorell. And Dan is the health officer for the Health Department of Northwest Michigan. He was previously the organization's deputy health officer and environmental health director. His 26-year career in environmental health began at the Genesee County Health Department as environmental health sanitarian. In 2001, Mr. Thorell began at the Grand Traverse County Health Department and held various positions, including environmental health director. Throughout his career, he has worked in all facets of environmental health. He currently serves on the board of directors for the Michigan Association of Local Public Health. It is our pleasure to have Dan speak to us on a topic he knows very well.
Basically, Anna did a really good job of kind of giving you a broad overview. I'm going to get into a little bit more details with some of the regulation and statewide septic code stuff. And you may hear a little bit of overlap, but sometimes hearing it twice, right, we're really just gonna drive those points home, so. Yeah, so just to give you an idea, I don't know how many of you, some of you know, but not all of you. The way that health departments are distributed throughout the state and how it's organized, the framework, there's 83 counties in Michigan. And you are either a single county health department or a district health department. There's 45 local health departments and there's 30 single county and 14 district health departments, which the health department of Northwest Michigan is one of those district health departments. We also have the city of Detroit as their own health department. And so that's, basically the way it's distributed throughout the state. I gotta move here so I can read some of this. So we all have, as Anna mentioned, we have local sanitary codes that regulate septic systems, and those are primarily for residential properties, usually single family or two family. And then some like commercial, like an office building or something. And there's very clear standards. So anything less than 1,000 gallons per day that of flow that comes out of that building of sanitary wastewater is regulated by our local sanitary code. So for flows that exceed 1,000 gallons but are less than 10,000 gallons, the Michigan criteria for subsurface sewage disposal covers that. And there's all kinds of design criteria and regulations that are followed in that, but the local health department still administers that. So basically, commercial systems, residential and commercial systems under 10,000 gallons are dealt with by the local health department. Yeah, so like I was saying, anything less than 10,000 gallons, the local health department pretty much we cover that with some involvement of the state. There's also another regulation that has to do with subdivisions and land divisions less than an acre, and that was part of the Land Division Act that came about in the late 90s. And what that deals with is like if you see like a subdivision out anywhere, let's say just houses, or even sometimes you see like these storage units that get marketed that have a bathroom in them or something like that. Those are covered by those administrative rules, which those have different regulations that we have to deal with, and the health department also deals with those. So where the state is primarily involved is flows that are over 10,000 gallons. And to give you some perspective here, so like a typical house, like a 3-bedroom house, you're looking at 450 gallons a day. Okay, that's a typical 3-bedroom house. So that's much, much less than the 10,000 gallons. Are we still having a problem?
No, I'm just trying to move. That's just not a big deal.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't think it'll be.
So anything that's not sanitary sewage is also regulated by the state. So that would be like food processing waste. Like if you like someplace that makes like jams or something, or like a milk producer, those are all regulated by Eagle, and the health department is not involved. And then Anna kind of touched on this, existing system evaluations that the health department does. So we do those, they're driven by failures, complaints, change of use, and in some jurisdictions, time of transfer is something that is done there. And some of the townships that were on Anna's list, we have Torch Lake Township, Milton Township, the Village of Elk Rapids and Elk Rapids Township are all ones that do this time of transfer, time of sale. And they basically, it's their ordinance. They contracted with the health department to basically say through an and not really a contract, through an intergovernmental agreement, it's a mouthful there, to have us do the inspections. So we do the inspections, we provide the homeowner and the township the reports, and then they enforce their own ordinance. So that's the way that works. So our own district sanitary code here at the Health Department of Northwest Michigan, we regulate the placement and construction of septic systems, through permits and inspections. And the majority of the systems, there is, like Anna said, there is no ongoing maintenance requirements. The only exception is for advanced treatment systems, where we have operating permits, because those systems have a treatment component that has to be looked at by a qualified system maintenance provider on a regular basis. I think there's a gentleman in the back here that might know something about that. So anyways, so there's a number of different options out there for using advanced treatment but they all do need to be looked at. They need to be maintained. And it's at a higher level than like your typical homeowner is gonna do. So that's why you have those arrangements. I will say about our sanitary code is the code is robust and protective of public health generally. You know, if the system is permitted, following the design criteria for its use and cited properly and following all the regulations in our sanitary code, that system is gonna work well. It's gonna treat the wastewater well. We are very blessed in this area. Our predecessors were thoughtful about public health and the environment. 50 years ago, or more than 50 years ago, they put a sanitary code in place that was very protective. We have 100 feet isolation to surface water, which is the high bar in the state. Most health departments are 50, some are 75. And then the big one is 48 inches of vertical separation from the bottom of the drain field to groundwater or any other limiting layer like clay. So if you think about that, you know, here's the bottom of the drain field and then groundwater's right here. You have 48 inches of soil to treat that wastewater, and what's in the soil to treat it is typically microorganisms. When the wastewater is going through it, you get anaerobic or aerobic digestion of those nutrients, and pathogens are basically outcompeted and go away. Okay, there's studies out there that say that you need at least 2 feet of suitable high and dry soil to make sure you have adequate wastewater treatment. And we have double that. So that's good. In some of those other cases, like I was talking about advanced treatment, we do narrow that down because we're pre-treating the wastewater. We're removing some of the nutrients and polishing that wastewater so it's cleaner, so it doesn't need as much soil when it goes into the ground. So same slide. We didn't talk. This just happened organically. So this is, you know, typical wastewater system, septic tank, drain field. I won't go into too much detail, but I just wanted to show you, because Anna did, about the basic setup for septic system. But this is where the business happens, right? For treatment in a septic system. Mostly. You get primary treatment here, and then you have the effluent come out, and then at the bottom of the drain field where the media touches the soil, that's where you get the bacterial growth that you want. We keep these systems very close to the ground surface because you want oxygen going into that system. You want aerobic bacteria. Over time, that changes and you get some anaerobic action because through the life of a drain field, you know, you have some things that go on, and I show that on this next slide. When it's brand new, the water just dumps in to the front here, and this arrow right here, it's really big and thick, shows you get like a really point saturation for wastewater, and you don't get a lot of good treatment, you know, when that's happening, and that's kind of a misnomer when people talk about, well, new septic system, a brand new septic system is the best at treatment for gravity, and I would say I would disagree with that, because what happens is you get that point saturation when it's going in. It takes a few years, and you start building a biomat, and this spreads, right? So where you're actually getting your best treatment is down here, right? And it may take 5-10 years to get to that point. The only, you know, if we're talking about treatment, you can also pump into a low pressure distribution system. That's a whole another thing, but that spreads it out evenly from day one, and that's a better setup for treatment. But the vast majority of systems are gravity. So just to give you you know, kind of what this looks like, the bottom of a drain field, you have the gravel or the media in the drain field, and then you have the soil here, and the water's moving through all those little pathways between you know, the soil particles, as you can imagine, you know, touching each other. And the water's moving through there, but over time, you get, it becomes saturated and you get anaerobic digestion, which creates this black tarry stuff called biomat. And it's just basically a byproduct of the bacteria doing their thing. And that's, you know, basically over time that happens, and eventually that plugs up the drain field completely where it just will not accept any more water, and that's when you have to replace it. So in good sandy soil, that's like 30 years, 25 to 30 years, if you take care of the system. If you never pump your tank, you're dumping all kinds of crazy stuff down the drain, it's gonna be much sooner than that. So just some other, what does system failure look like? This is digging into a drain field, showing the ponded water, because of that soil interface with the stone, with the media is plugged up, it's saturated. You can see the black on the stone. That is not my hand. So I took these photos a long time ago, and I think it was with a contractor, and I'm like, I'm trying to get a picture of the soil with the black in it, and he just grabs it, I'm like, okay. Thanks. Another funny story about that, really, because they're in this stuff all the time, so I was with a contractor and looking at a problem site, and they lifted the lid off the septic tank. And of course, I go to look in like this, I had a calculator in my pocket, and it just goes whoop, right into the tank. And he reaches in there and grabs it, shakes it off, and hands it back to me, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do, right? So I took it, So yeah, I didn't use that calculator. Well, you can see in here, like where you see his fingers are kind of black, but that's where that, at a micro scale, it's in the soil, kind of plugging everything up. So, why are we talking about, some of these efforts about, either locally or that's, the state level about dealing with septic systems and looking at them. It's so they don't get to this point. I mean, these are catastrophic failures where, obviously that's not a good day, right? You're mowing your lawn and you go through, that was a tank that's old and crumbling, and that happens because a lot of our tanks are concrete, and over time, the things that are in your water and the gases that are created in a septic tank, I mean, they really degrade the concrete. So that does happen. And then this is a big problem, with trees that are nearby drain fields. I've seen this a lot where the roots will just completely fill a pipe, and this happens quite often. And this is just kind of typical if you haven't seen this before. Like if your drain field is shot and it's starting to pond, you get a tall green grass and like ponding water, and you can see that over there. So just to kind of give everybody an idea of what that actually looks like. So statewide sanitary code legislation. So Senate bills 299 and 300, and then House bills 4479 and 4480. Introduced last year about this time. Really over the past 20 or more years, Anna touched on this, there have been several efforts to pass a statewide sanitary code of some sort. There's been different variations of it. But really to create a unified code. The current bills, were basically recycled from what was introduced in 2018. The bill sponsor, basically told me that, said, I just took the bills that were introduced last time and we just reintroduced them. So the current bills are in their third draft. And there's a fourth draft coming up pretty soon that we're gonna see. And that's a good thing because we've, all along I'll talk about this a little bit more, but we've been trying to get a seat at the table, local health departments, because the bills are not, there's some aspects of the bills that are not good, that we want to see changed before they, get pushed into the legislature and voted on. And I'll go over that here. So the good, let's talk about the good. First of all, I'd just like to say that, there is no bigger proponent of treating wastewater well and protecting public health or the environment than local health departments. We overwhelmingly support the concept of a statewide code. There's a lot of reasons for that, which I'll get into. But some of the other, some of the good things are with this current bill, these current bills, which would make this statewide code, is that there's a statewide program for approving advanced treatment systems. Right now, it's done piecemeal through every county, or every local health department, I should say, not every county. They all do it different, like what is gonna be approved as an advanced treatment system. It provides minimum qualifications for local health department staff that are working in those programs. There's an incorporation of risk-based initial inspections. And that is, systems that it applies to systems that are older than 30 years, no record of a septic system, and are within 300 feet of water. So it's kind of taking that, Torch Lake Township model and incorporating that, and that was in the recent, draft, the third draft. And that was after a lot of discussion about, what are we really trying to accomplish here? Because what we're trying to change, or get the bill sponsors to see is that, the low hanging fruit here are the places that are at high risk, the places that are right next to water that we've never been on before. The health department's never set foot on the property before, so they don't have a permit, or they're old, they're over 30 years old. And that is really, if you're gonna do this and focus on it on a broad scale, why not look at the high risk areas first? So the decentralized public health system has varied regulation of septic systems across the state. So this would provide uniform design and siting, uniform regulations for septic systems across the state. Like I said before, in northern Michigan, we're really blessed to have a strong sanitary code, and we have had that for years because early on we recognized the importance of protecting our waters and public health, and a lot of that is tied to the economics of the region, right? We're a big destination spot, and we have pristine waters and beautiful spaces that we want to keep that way. There are other sanitary codes, other areas of the state that have very weak sanitary codes. They're outdated. They actually allow, if you wanted to, in some areas to put a septic system right into groundwater, believe it or not. So those things, very much in favor of having a minimum standard across the state. So that is not happening again, because a lot of the efforts, you may have seen the articles in newspaper a few years ago about Michigan State did a huge study across the entire state looking at multiple waterways, and they were taking samples from those waterways and looking for human indicators, genetic indicators of human waste. So they were looking at gut bacteria and looking at for DNA of gut bacteria, basically, that are only found in humans, and they were finding them in many waterways throughout the state, and more so in the southern part of the state. That's where primarily a lot of these weaker sanitary codes are located, and a lot has to do with the soil that they have to deal with. And there was decisions a long time ago, a lot of them were economically driven, right? They don't have good sources of sand to build up systems. They literally have no like sand and gravel pits. So, by doing this, it will, in those areas, will be a little bit of, difficult from that standpoint. But, do we want to keep on contaminating the waters of the state that way? We have technologies now that we don't necessarily need to rely on just sand and gravel. We can do it in different ways. So, some of the challenges, and I will specifically go into a little bit more into detail about the mandated evaluations of every 5 years, and that's for systems that are less than 10,000 gallons. So residential systems and commercial systems, a lot of commercial systems. We lose local control for septic ordinances that, Anna was talking about with some of the townships, local units of government. That is something that, like the Michigan Township Association, for instance, is not in favor of this because of the local control issue. We also need to, if these bills pass, there's a need to digitize environmental health records and put them into document management systems for existing permits, because I'll tell you what, in our own health department is this way now, and we are just starting the process of digitizing records. But if you want a record basically they're organized by county and township. Okay, you have to go to a file and then you have to take your fingers and, do this and look through a file to find that record. And a lot of health departments are in the same boat. So, and we have thousands of records, many thousands of records, for the septic systems in our jurisdiction. Another one is, the need for a statewide inventory and database for these existing systems. That kind of is tied to the digitizing those systems. And then funding is a big one for local health departments, because without funding, how would this even get off the ground? There's technical language in the bills and the definition of failure that need to be worked on. And it currently does not address non-conforming septic systems in the bills right now. It says that these evaluations have to happen every 5 years, and that, they're addressed if you find a failure, but the definition of failure is flawed. And there's nothing in there that says if you find a septic tank in a drain field that is like size for a 2-bedroom house and it's a 6-bedroom house, there's nothing saying that you have to do anything about it. So, I mean, that's a problem, because when you have an undersized system for, a larger home, you're not really getting good, adequate wastewater treatment. So going into more detail about the evaluation model with the 5-year frequency, and this is really the crux of the issue. This is the non-starter for health departments. This is, we do not support the bills as currently written. We're working with the legislators to try to move off of this and get something better. But the cost is huge. There's an estimate of 1.4 million septic systems in the state. That's actually low because it's a 2010 number and it hasn't been updated. So with that, but using that number, which is going to be higher, 280,000 evaluations per year. This is based on the 5-year frequency. And if you figured an average cost of evaluation and pumping of approximately like $700, because some would not have to be pumped. And some would, so, just trying to come up with a number, and it's conservative. It is a very conservative number. 196 million per year for septic owners across the state. And then, I didn't even go into like the, if you figure if you found like 20% had problems and had to maybe be replaced or repaired, and the costs associated with that, it gets the price tag gets really, really high. There's a funding need for local health departments to do this. So that's that cost right there. Septic treatment capacity is a big issue. We're currently right now experiencing challenges with treatment capacity because there's less land application sites every year. Because farmers, now that we have things like PFAS and those are, in septic tanks because of household products and whatnot, they're a little bit reluctant to have, the septic hauler put that on a field that they want to grow crops on, understandably so. So, and we just don't have a lot of new septic treatment capacity in the treatment plants coming up. I know of a case right now where there's a septic hauler in Antrim County near Mansalona that is filling up a big tanker truck and hauling that to Frankfurt in Benzie County every week to offload their septic. And that's how they do it. I mean, they're trucking it all the way to Benzie County, it seems crazy. Enforcement is another issue that, we're really concerned about at health departments, because we don't see with a 5-year frequency thing, mandate that local prosecutors are going to help us. We're concerned about local prosecutors being able to be involved because they have so many other things on their plate. I mean, and you can imagine across the state that would probably increase their caseload pretty dramatically by the folks that may not, want us to be looking at their septic system every 5 years. So, and then there's, staff safety concerns. One of the components of the bill requires the evaluator to go inside the house and verify plumbing. I'm concerned about that. Well, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, staff safety, and then all of a sudden, now you have to make appointments and try to align schedules where, when you're managing programs like this, you want an inspector or sanitarian to grab, you know, a stack of permits or evaluations they need to do and just figure out their own course and do it the most efficient way that they can, so. Workforce is another huge one. Right now, we don't have the workforce capacity to implement a 5-year evaluation program. We just don't. We are concerned in public health about in the next, 5 to 10 years of 30 to 50% of the workforce retiring, or, that kind of issue. So we estimate that we would need 3 times the existing environmental health staff in our on-site programs here at the Health Department of Northwest to implement this program on a 5-year frequency. And that currently we have 6, so we would need 12 more for a total of 18. And we don't even have any place to put them. So those are some of the concerns along the lines of this, the 5-year frequency. This is a really busy slide, admittedly, but so in the regulation, or I shouldn't say regulation, in the bills as proposed currently, this is the timeline. So there's a little bit of a weird timeline. Once this, Anna alluded to this, why maybe local governments should do things now, because it's going to take a while. And actually, if this did get passed in its current version with a 5-year frequency, I would be happy about this because it's going to give a lot of time to like figure some of these things out. So if it passed the effective date, within 3 years of the effective date, the state has 3 years to basically come up with the rules, right? What that statewide sanitary code is going to look like. And then 45 days after the code, all the advanced or alternative treatment systems would have to be evaluated. Within a year after the code, so basically 4 years, that's when the initial evaluations, those risk-based ones I was talking about, that's when those would start. And then, for those properties that are over 30 years old, that are within 300 feet of surface water, or we don't have a record on, those would start. And then after 75% of those have been evaluated, that's when the 5-year frequency ones start. So how long will that take? 75% of the initials, I don't know. I have no clue how long that'll take. If you think 3 + 1, that's 4, it's going to take, if I had to guess, it's going to be a number of years, 3 years, maybe, let's say. So you're talking 7 years before the 5-year frequency, evaluations start. So I don't know, that's just interesting. I thought I would just throw that up here. That's the way it's currently written right now. So our recommendations, and again, I said before, we are in favor of a statewide code. This is, I'm not trying to say that we're not. There's just certain aspects of it that we are recognizing that cannot be implemented, okay, from the local health department perspective. There has to be changes to make it so it can be implemented. And what we favor overwhelmingly throughout the state is to do a time of transfer or point of sale evaluations as an alternative to this frequency-based evaluation. I'll tell you why. It's been proven to be effective. There's a number of health departments, counties that do this already. A good example is in Benzie and Leelanau counties. Benzie's been doing it since 1993. And over time, they've seen the non-conforming system, that's what they call it, the rate, when the evaluations are done, go from about 15 to 16% down to 3% today. Okay, so it does work. It takes time, but it does work. In Leelanau County, we just redid the sanitary code there back in the fall of 2022, and it just came on board of January of 23, but that's when they started doing evaluations based on the Benzie model in Leelanau. The thing I like about it is, there's an expectation when you buy a piece of property, when a property transfers, that systems are going to be evaluated. Okay. there's willing participants to that process. There is money on the table to address things that come up, you know, if it needs to be repaired or replaced. There's negotiation between the buyer and seller. There's an expectation, there's negotiation, things get taken care of. There is an incentive to conduct that evaluation, because without that, you know, if it's the law, without that, the sale's not going through, the title company's not gonna process that paperwork. So it just makes sense from that standpoint. A group of health officers and environmental health directors and, environment, Great Lakes and energy staff and other stakeholders, including the watershed, folks are in other, like, Michigan Association of Counties, Michigan Township Association. We have been working with, the bill sponsors, you know, since November to try to affect some of these changes. And those folks, a lot of them are kind of saying the same things I am about, you know, supporting this with the not being able to support this with, the frequency-based inspections. And I think, you know, in the perfect world, when everybody's, you know, we had all the money in the world and all the staff in the world, sure, you know, if we could look at every system every 5 years, that would be great, you know, in the perfect world. But I think to implement a system, an evaluation program, I think doing it this way through, time and transfer point of sale is the way that can be implemented successfully. We are continuing to work with, Representative Skaggs and Senator Singh, and I will say, I will give them a lot of credit, because back in 2018, when this was going on, we tried to get a seat at the table, and there was, I mean, it was crickets, right? The door was closed. They did not include local health departments that they were saying that would have to basically run the program into the conversation and listen to us. Rep Skaggs and Senator Singh are listening to us. They're listening to our concerns. They are making changes. So I'm hopeful that, we can, get to a point where local health departments can, and other, stakeholders can say, yes, we can support this. I will say, realtors, the Michigan Association of Realtors is against a statewide time of sale or time of transfer. One of the main reasons I've been told is that they're afraid that it will hold up, the transactions, will hold up the sales. I will say that we've built in a good example. Again, I'll go back to Benzie and Leelanau. Right in the sanitary code, there's built-in timelines, like you have so many days to do the evaluation. If there's a lot of problems that are found, the sale can still go through. They just basically enter into an agreement, put money in escrow. So those things can be addressed. It's not a reason to not do that. We can address that. And I will also say during the public hearings, because I'm also the health officer at Benzie Leelanau too. During the public hearings, we never heard from one realtor that said they didn't want the program that had been done successfully in Benzie County. We didn't hear from one that said that they did not want it in Leelanau. In fact, there was a handful of realtors that were at the public hearing in Leelanau that said that they're very much in favor of it, because it takes the liability off of the realtor. Things are looked at. You know, they can, things can proceed with some sort of confidence that, you know, the septic's been looked at. It's not something that's gonna rear its ugly head, you know, weeks down the road. So I guess we're to the question part.
What's the date of the sanitary code?
The current sanitary code?
Yeah, like what was the first one? Because there are a lot of old houses up here. And people had the outhouses and they did not have indoor plumbing. And then somewhere around the 1920s, I think, a lot of people started to have indoor plumbing, and then they would have had to have had a septic field, right?
Yeah, and back then, I mean, there wasn't a code. They just put something in whenever it worked. You know, lots of times dry wells, if you've ever heard that term. And it's, you know, typically you'd have a septic tank and then maybe you'd have a dry well, which is just be like, it could have been a 55-gallon drum that had gravel around it with holes drilled in the side of it. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. I saw one time where, somebody put the effluent pipe from a septic tank into a buried car. They actually rolled up the window, so it like, you know, the pipe was like that, so. I mean, there's all kinds of weird stuff out there. The modern sanitary codes came about in the mid to late 1960s. And I think really a lot of the things that are in our current version were more like in the early 70s. Our current sanitary district code is from 2017, so where we just made updates.
We're gonna go to the Zoom people now.
Yeah, there's several questions about funding, adequate funding and help for people who are gonna need to update their systems. And in the chat, Jennifer
Mhm.
McKay from Mint did put a website to go to for that, but do you have any other comments about
Yeah.
finance help?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. So the state set aside $35 million to help people replace their septic systems. Okay, and they partnered with MySaves. It's called the MySaves program. So they partnered with the banking industry to set it up so it's a low interest loan, but there's income criteria. So there's income criteria. You have to be below a certain level of poverty. I don't know all the details, but if you're below that, then it's like a 1% loan. And then over that, then the loan is just market, you know, but it's easier to get the funding through that, specifically for septic system replacement. I will say, I don't think 35 million is enough, especially if these bills pass. There'll be a lot of systems that are uncovered. You know, which is, again, you know, I mean, this is all good work. It's just, you know, implementing it, but we will need more money for that.
And are there any homeowner tax credits?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, sir.
About how much does a new system cost? About in Emmett County, I've got an impacted system, so I'm gonna have to put a new system in. How long is it gonna take me to get that in?
Good questions. I think, you know, right now, it's hard to say because it's site specific, you know, like if your site had high groundwater and you had to put in a mound, it's gonna be more. Or if you had to put in an alternative treatment system. But like, I think the conventional septic tank drain field in, high and dry soil, nothing special, lots of room to work is like $10,000 is what I think is kind of a good average. You know, give or take.
How long does it take
That's a good question too. I mean, it just really depends on
finding somebody? I mean,
contractors' availability, and I know that's always I mean, in recent years, that's been challenging, right?
That's what I've heard, you know.
Yeah. I will say that I think a lot of the contractors that we work with, like if you're having a problem, like if your system has failed or something, they'll do, they'll do what they can to basically prioritize and get people taken care of.
On your website, do you have contractors that you prefer to work with because they're good at doing this kind of stuff?
Well,
Right?
We kind of have
Or
to,
are you?
we
you
can't
do that
really,
kind of work?
yeah, we have to be a little impartial. But, you know, if you had further questions, I would reach out to you're in Emmett County, you said?
Yeah.
So one of our sanitarians, Dan Banash, is in our Emmett office. Yep. Yeah, and he can probably, you know, steer you in the right direction and get some, you know, more detailed questions. And I'm sure he's been there for 30 years, probably. If you tell him where you live, he's probably like, oh yeah, I know where that, you know, this is what you're gonna have to do. But yeah, great resource.
Are those loans available to people now or only when
It-
that bill is passed?
No, the loans, the septic replacement loans don't have anything to do with the bills.
Oh.
Okay, that's already, it's already been appropriated, and it's taken like a year for them to get everything figured out how they're gonna do it. But I will say too, the loan programs, you have to you basically have to have put in a certain standard. That has standards for the system, which is fine for us because they will be, either match or be less than the high standard that we already have in our sanitary codes. I think we're actually gonna, be able to access that money a lot easier in northern Michigan than some areas in other parts of the state, because their local sanitary codes are not gonna be able, they don't match up with the standards for getting the money through this loan, so it's gonna be more difficult, in those areas.
Couple of questions about the statewide code. Is there a major reason why Michigan hasn't been able to implement a statewide code? And if adequate funding was provided, would the health department be willing to accept periodic inspections in a statewide bill?
Good questions. Wow, really put me on the spot. Well, I guess the reason, we are, it's been said a lot, we're the last state in the country that doesn't have a uniform sanitary code. And I think a lot has to do with our public health structure. We're decentralized, so we have, every health department has its own sanitary code. That's just the way the public health code was set up. We have our geology in Michigan varies greatly, from the UP all the way down to southern Michigan. So I think that has something to do with it. Yeah, just going back to what I was saying earlier, even though we don't have a statewide sanitary code, a lot of the systems, especially the commercial ones, in like subdivisions and things like that, those codes are uniform throughout the state. It's just really the residential, sanitary codes, those are the ones that are so varied, that are causing, the issues. And it'll be, I think, having a uniform code, will address many problems, starting now and going into the future. It's just looking back at everything that's existing, right? To the question about, if we had adequate funding, and space and all of that, would we be in favor of a frequency type code? I guess I would say that, I still think some of those other issues exist, and I'm concerned about like the enforcement side of it, with local prosecutors and whatnot. Yeah, funding would be great. I still think even if it was, a 5-year frequency is too soon. If it was extended out, maybe at 10 or 15, that would be much more palatable. But funding is a big thing with that, and just, having in workforce, and just having the people. I didn't really say before, but like whenever we need to hire, in recent years have to hire a sanitarian, it's not easy. We don't get tons of applicants, it takes a while.
Yeah.
So.
One question here.
I have, excuse me for not reading the material, but as I understood it, Michigan's the only state that doesn't have a statewide.
Right.
No, California doesn't.
Oh, California?
I think they passed one.
Well, they've been trying.
Okay, so they haven't done it yet?
No, that's been going on for over 20 years.
Yeah. Now, have other states gone through this transition recently? And what can we learn from how they've gone through it? Because this, to me, seems like a non-starter. If it's important, why aren't we doing it over the next 5 to 8 years or something like that?
Good points.
What can we learn?
Well, and I think we
How
are,
have they done it?
yeah, we're looking at, I know that the other Great Lakes states have been looked at, surrounding us to see what they're doing. And that's, where the 5-year frequency, it was pointed out that some of our neighboring states around the Great Lakes are doing a program that is a 5-year frequency, but the problem is it's not apples to apples. So with the bills that are introduced right now as written, the criteria for doing the evaluation is like a full blown, like you're digging up the septic tank lid, you are looking in the septic tank, you are digging into the drain field, you're looking at the plumbing. There's a lot of factors to it. It's gonna take, a couple hours, for someone to do it. Maybe you do 1 or 2 a day. Some of the other neighboring states around us, they do have that requirement, but typically it's a very cursory inspection where they're just driving to the site, looking it over, making sure that there's no ponded sewage and then moving on to the next one where they can do 15 to 20 evaluations in a day. So it's not apples to apples, and that was pointed out to the bill sponsors, you know, at one of the meetings too, is like, we need, you know, we can't just say, well, they're doing it, why can't we? You know, we have to look at, it has to be.
Well, at least that would be a starting point, and then you go to the point of sale situation. We just sold a home that we've had for 35 years. Now, nobody looked at the system for 35 years. Come on, give me a break.
Right, no, I agree, that's, yeah, I'm not,
Every 5 years, 10 years, 7 years, you know, pick a number, but, you know, give it a start.
yeah, I mean, good points, absolutely.
We had a gentleman right here, yes.
I'm probably swimming upstream here. I'm an engineer and I've designed quite a few systems. And the Michigan criteria dictates what I do in conjunction with your health department. I don't understand why you're saying there's no statewide code. I think I'm sort of skeptical, but I think that there is a strong code, and I think it's very conservative, the Michigan criteria. But it doesn't address ongoing inspections. I think that's what you're looking for, and I would agree with that, but I don't think you really want to mess with the Michigan criteria. In fact, you guys are dictated by the Michigan criteria. There is a code.
Right.
And it's sort of, to say there's no state code elicits a negative response. Well, we got to do something, but there is a strong code. In fact, there was a white paper that was published in 2004 during the Granholm administration. You need local health departments because you need response, you know, you need people to respond immediately, you know, and up here, if you get a building permit, the health department has to sign off on it. If you're gonna add a bedroom, you know, which is another issue, but it's not unregulated at all. You know, you're coming across like, geez, we gotta do something, you know, with all due respect, there's a strong code in place.
Well, there are still 55-gallon drums out there.
But they want 150 gallons per bedroom. The code that we're using was put in 1993, the Michigan criteria. Since then, toilets went from 3.6 gallons to 1 gallon. And I found on my follow-ups that 100 gallons, if a statewide code is brought into force, and I know they're gonna take that 150 gallons and cut it down to 50 gallons. And as far as your 4-foot isolation from high groundwaters, there's numerous studies have shown that 24 inches is adequate. And there's a big difference between 24 and 48. You might go from a gravity system, well, all you gotta do is build your house up 2 feet higher, to a pumping situation. And, you know, Sheboygan County is 24 inches, which is another district. This health department in Northwest Michigan is a little difficult to work with, to be quite frank.
We have one more
One
question. We, gonna wrap up with, can the health department rely on third parties to conduct inspections such as Kalkaska and Manistee counties?
Yes, that is, well, that's in the proposed legislation. So it can be either a health department or a registered evaluator. And then the Eagle, during that whole process of coming up with the rules for the statewide code, would come up with what does that mean to be a registered evaluator? Like what things would they have to do? What certifications, what kind of qualifications, that kind of stuff.